important first step, and we need to get around to monetizing those social and environmental accounts. We're still mapping yesterday's flood. We've been doing that since day one, so the maps are out of date the day before we put them out. This is where the insurance tail is wagging the dog of flood risk, and that needs to change. There's no reason that we shouldn't be mapping tomorrow's flood rather than yesterday's. And we continue to remove land from the floodplain with amendments hand over fist. We spend millions of dollars doing this. Once it's a floodplain, it's a floodplain. National Levee Safety Committee report that's only looking at the levee itself. We need to broaden this to flood risk. We can't be putting together a national levee safety program that really only looks at levees. That's only part of the issue. If the levee is there, I don't care how good it is, sooner or later it's going to fail or overtop. So the more development there is behind it is the problem. It's not just the levee. This top-down approach, we heard that this morning, and that's very positive stuff, because the two things, what we need to do, the solutions don't rest in the federal government. The tools to do that are at the local government, as you heard here again this morning. Zoning, building codes, all those sorts of things, development decisions, that's not at the federal level. Federal government brings two things to the program. I call it D&D, the double D. Data and dollars. Leveraging that data and dollars to make the right things happen through incentives and delegation is how we need to get to this approach. Tolerable risk guidelines. There are some who believe that we can calculate by formula how much risk I'm going to tolerate. Well, I'll give you an example of how much I'll tolerate. As long as you pick up the consequences of my risk, I'll tolerate all the risk in the world. Until you make me tolerate my own risk, don't pretend that you're going to develop a formula that tells me how much risk I can tolerate. Those who live at risk must begin to pay more of the cost of living at risk. Now let's talk a little bit about the ugly. I don't want to get carried away with this, but the ugly is coming primarily right now out of Congress. Short-term, save my constituent solutions that are bad long-term policy. Let's put out a flood map, but let's delay you having to buy insurance even though we know you're at risk and we know you're in an identified floodplain for 5 years. And in the next 5 years after that, you can phase in your insurance. If you can find that, after 5 years, if you can find that mortgage or that person. Or delays in issuing maps. You've seen all these bills come out. I mean, it's just ignore the problem. Even though I know my constituents at risk, don't force them to buy insurance. The risk is not the flooding, the risk is having to buy insurance. I can't imagine anybody in Congress passing a bill that says, I want my constituents to not have to buy fire insurance for the next 5 years. Could you imagine that? Somehow we aren't getting our message across, people. Wind on the flood program. Boy, there's a brilliant idea. The general rule is that policy change can't precede public support. So that tells us our challenge is we need to get public support moving. There are maybe some lessons. Congress did effectuate a policy change without public support, and they did it surreptitiously. They said, states, if you want all of your DOT money, you have to pass a law to have a 21-year-old drinking age. They didn't vote on having a 21-year-old drinking age in the nation. They just withheld a little bit of money. End result, we've got 21-year-old drinking age in the whole country, don't we? Maybe we need to figure out how to do that with flood, okay? What can we do to move the needle? Better data, open source, share it all. NOAA's Digital Coast is a great example. Get those that live at risk to help pay more of that cost of living at risk. that we've got to get away from that. I've lived here 40 years and it's never flooded. A fellow called me from West Virginia last week, said, do I really need flood insurance? I've been here 40 years and never flooded. I said, you had a fire in 40 years? Nope, haven't had a fire. Are you trying to drop your fire insurance? Oh, heck no. Perhaps we need to start talking, all of us in this room, you know who we talk, you know how many people in this nation live at risk, of flood risk? About 10%. We spend our time talking to that 10%. We aren't talking to that 90% who are paying for them to live at risk. Maybe we need to start talking to the 90%. And then we need to help Congress figure out how to do this with a little bit of cover. They aren't going to vote to reduce disaster relief on the fourth time, let alone the second time, nor are they going to vote to directly ask those people living at risk to pay more of the cost. Somehow we've got to help them figure out how to do this with cover, like a base closure act. There are some tweaks. We need bold changes, and we're talking about how do we get some of those bold changes. We all need to work on that. We're going to do some tweaks in the meantime, but the tweaks aren't going to get us out of this box. We can't buy our way out of this problem. So we've got a mission for the next 5 years. Let's get some bold changes. If you share this concern and vision with us, I ask you to join us in the association and join these people who are trying to make those changes. We can do it. Let's do it. Thanks.